One.
Good evening. I'm Bernard Green, Chair of the Brookline Select Board, and this is the meeting of the Select Board for January 23rd, 2023. Let's start off with any announcements or updates from Select Board members. Miriam.
Thank you. I'm going to make it brief, but I am officially letting the public know that I'm not running again for Select Board. I am going to be running for School Committee, and I'm going to leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Michael.
Well, then I was going to say one thing, but I'll say a second, which is we'll miss you. John Van Scoik posted something that I want to give him a special recognition for. He did a great job listening to the school committee and put out an email in his regular All Politics is Local that had some really interesting data in it about school enrollment, and that ultimately will flow over into our discussion of school budget. And I think it's important for the public to know that that's coming.
Okay, Paul.
Yep. Oh, John was next. Did you want to say?
I'll be real brief.
I'm sorry, I didn't.
No, that's okay. I didn't really make too much of a commotion there. Mike, thank you very much. Very pleasant. Miriam, to have served with you has been one of the better experiences of a lifetime in terms of learning experiences. I'll say that much. And I do wish you well. I wish all the candidates well, but I think that you want to serve in another capacity after having served on the select board, and heaven knows, I think we all appreciate that's not the easiest thing in the world to do. It is a real tribute to the spirit that I think is important to our Brookline governance. So I wasn't expecting you to make that announcement tonight, but thank you for what you have given to the town, because it's considerable. But the other thing I want to say is that there was a service, in memory and in tribute to Chobe Hoy that was Sunday, and then again last night at her home. And it was so special, not just because Chobe was special, and I don't have to go on and on and on because so many people have paid tributes to her since she passed away. But the other thing that's special about it was there aren't too many social gatherings in living rooms that have happened since COVID. And to be part of one was a really uplifting experience, to see people we hadn't seen for a long time, to be able to just put politics aside and talk about some things that are special to all of us in Brookline was itself special. And I was glad I was there. The turnout was fantastic. And Chobe made Brookline a better place. And you could see the evidence of that by the memorial that was paid to her on Sunday and Monday.
Paul.
Sure. Thank you, Bernard. And I concur with my colleague, Mr. Van Scoik, on your service. Thank you. It's been a pleasure. We still have many months to go, so it's not like you're leaving tomorrow. The best of.
Go quietly.
You're not.
I promise.
Oh, I thought you would. Just kidding.
We're shocked.
What a surprise.
Well, I too have learned a lot, and I appreciate working with you in the collaboration. So it's been a pleasure. Bernard and I and some others last week, Friday, you may have went Saturday, attended the Mass Municipal Association annual meeting. It was my first. I'm sure that others have been there many times. I think, Miriam, you were there. I never bumped into you, but it was a big event. But I wanted to take a little bit, a moment to kind of summarize some things that I'd heard that I think are pretty germane to Brookline. So Governor Healy and Lieutenant Governor Driscoll discussed their proposed Municipal Empowerment Act, which is a package of legislation that they're putting forward. And there was actually a breakout session that I attended with one of our staff that dug into this very deeply, and I got a deep learning about this act. I'm not going to be able to cover it all, but the act, if passed by the legislature, would allow cities and towns to increase local meals, lodging taxes, and create a new local option motor vehicle excise tax. So there's some opportunities for opportunities for revenue if should municipalities so choose, should the legislation pass. There are a number of proposed changes to help with affordability for seniors. It's good news, including a senior means tested exemption, similar to what we got from our local act that we put in for special legislation. Cost of living adjustments, senior exemptions, and recognizing that some seniors, for tax exemption purposes, live in homes that are actually held in trust. And so today they can't benefit from the tax exemptions because they're in trust, and it's a barrier. The act also updates borrowing rules for school projects. Now, you can go from 30 years to 40 years now, should the legislation pass, and make permanent a number of popular pandemic era allowances for hybrid public meetings, which is important because that has certainly helped with public engagement. And outdoor dining permits. There is also a proposed commission that's going to take a look at unfunded liabilities for non-pension employee benefits and see if they can wrangle those, otherwise known as OPEBs, which we often struggle with. And the administration is pitching the package as reducing red tape, which is very welcome on the town side with the state, while providing new options for making municipalities more resilient. So that's all good news. If you want to learn more about the extensive package of legislation, you go to mass.gov and do a quick search on Municipal Empowerment Act, and you will get lots of information. Thank you.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to wish Miriam all the best in her new adventure. I was on a school board in Ohio many years ago, and I could have warned you about running for a school committee. It's going to be rougher than the select board, I'm sure, but probably not as much fun. And Miriam and I do not agree on so many things. We agree on a lot of things, though. But what I think is important about our relationship is that we've found a way to sort of overcome that, and work with each other and, in a certain sense, support each other. And I think that that's a good example of how we need to work generally in town and, of course, throughout the country, with people who you don't always agree with, but you have to work with. And both of us want to get to some point, and we're not going to get there, purely in the way that we want to, but we'll get there sufficiently to each other's satisfaction that it's good for the community. So I thank you for that. I think that that's the example of something that, Paul, sort of led, and that is pulling together the different perspectives on the MBTA Communities Act. And I hope that we just let everyone know that that is a good way to be successful in achieving goals that you have and that may differ in the particulars with, the other so-called other side, but in general, will satisfy both sides, if that makes sense. Thank you, Miriam. I was also at the, it wasn't a service, it's just an open house at Chobe's house on Monday. And, Chobe was at the MLK event. I mentioned that Chobe was a great so-called, what do I call it?
Drum major.
Drum major for service, among other things. And, she really was someone who served the community very, very well, especially people in need, food pantry, I mean, just all on down the line. But what I think was most special about Chobe was she was really a good person. We'd get together at her house and do poetry readings, and you can see that there is something more than just an activist and someone who believed in service to others. It was a person who was really, really a good person, and therefore her activism was sincere and powerful. So that's my recollection of Chobe. In addition to all the great things she did, she's just a wonderful person. At that gathering, though, I did talk to someone who is in the know, although I'm not sure how well in the know this person was. who said that the Municipal Empower Act may be pulled or has been pulled either by the governor or the
Oh.
legislature. I'm not sure I understand how that, do you know something?
Yeah, the one piece of it was pulled, the portion that would have given municipalities control over the number of liquor licenses.
Oh, really?
It-
Just that?
Just
that.
one piece, yeah.
Good, good,
Yeah.
okay.
Because they did just present it to us on Friday. It would be
Yes.
unusual.
Yes.
Yeah.
Hold it over the weekend.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
It was in the Globe today.
Oh, that's on,
Pleasure.
okay, I should have read the Globe, okay.
Bernard, I do,
Sports section, really.
Okay,
I neglected one
yeah,
point of interest, I think, that the community may want to know about, if I may.
sure.
So I had received a phone call from a board member of the Brookline Arts Center. And as you know, the Brookline Arts Center has really an important community-based gallery that's a part of the Sanctuary Medicinal Cannabis Shop up in Coolidge Corner. It's a prominent location, and it gets a lot of foot traffic. They show some incredible art that's local and student-oriented. And it is a great benefit to the community. The board member had alerted me that Sanctuary is not renewing the lease for the Brookline Arts Center, and which is very, very unfortunate. And apparently they're getting short notice, being asked to vacate by February 1st, which seemed abrupt. First, I wanted the community to know that I think it's an important resource. It certainly is a good relationship builder between business and community. It's a great nonprofit. It serves a lot of children. And it does help fund because they do get some money for displaying art in the gallery. I believe it may still remain a gallery and they may hang someone else's art there, is what I had heard. But it's a little disappointing, to tell you the truth, for me. I did reach out to them and see if they'd be willing to have a conversation, to see if there's a way to salvage it or bridge it or make an adjustment. I haven't heard back, but I did do my thing, which is trying to find some common ground between these two parties. But I just want to let the community know that that really is a big deal. I think it's important that folks know that that's taking place.
Thank you. I was going to mention that in connection with a workshop at the MMA that I attended called Building Thriving Business Districts, how to be your, thriving business districts. And art centers and other similar events like that are the magnets that attract people to a business district. And we're really missing out on an opportunity to increase the foot traffic through our business district, through Coolidge Corner and the town generally, by losing that if we do lose it.
Yeah.
So, I hope that they come to their senses and
I hope so too.
renew the lease and allow us to benefit from the gallery. I think that's all I have to say. Miriam?
Well, I'll just mention so that I saw you at the main speaker, Eddie Glaude Jr. And he was really, I think, fabulous. And I'll keep it short, but he had a very good take-home point in terms of diversity. Diversity is a problem. Either you see diversity as a problem to solve for, or as a value we cherish. And I think that's really, to me, that gets to the heart of it, right? Is diversity something we're trying to solve, or is it a value that's important to the fabric of the community that we want to elevate? And so I think that's a really nice framing of it. I thought he really knew his audience well. One of the other things he said that really struck with me is we are not who we say we are in this country. The mirror keeps revealing the truth. And I think we have to make sure we're always looking in the mirror and that we're reflecting back what it is we want to see. And I think what we want to see as a town is that we value diversity, that it is something we cherish and that we try to achieve it because it has meaning for us. And it's not just something that we need to do. So I thought that was really, it was a fabulous keynote. Oh, thank you. And as Devin nicely reminds me to speak into the microphone. And then I had the joy of going to the fireside, the women's lunch, where I also saw Bernard, where you all got a shout out from me, by the way, where we talked about, it was about sustainability, but I think a lot of it was really about women in politics. And she talked about one of the things I personally have had to deal with, being cut off, being gaslit, being mansplained. And I'm sure you all recall, I said a lot when I first came on this board before your time, Paul. I used to say all the time, I'm still talking. And I used to say to Devin, I need a plaque. I need a plaque that says I'm still talking so I can just wave it. And I've hardly said it at all because you all learn. Because I think, when we don't do these things intentionally necessarily, but we do them. And as a woman in this position, I promise you, we do them. And it is nice to know I work with a group of people who learn and who are, willing to say, oh, okay, I didn't realize I was doing that. And how can we make it better? And I think that's part of Bernard and our working relationship. How do we make this work? We both want to get something done, right? So how do we figure it out so that we can make it work? Even if we don't necessarily agree. Compromise means you necessarily don't get everything you want, and you get some things, but not everything. And that should be for all parties. So anyways,
And
that's
something's
my
better
way
than
to
nothing.
say is that it was a nice shout out. I know Bernard was worried when I got up to the microphone. Devin was there. She promises it was a nice shout out. But that is to say also, it's really been a pleasure. And I don't think I'm going from the frying pan into the fire. I think I'm going from the fire into the frying pan.
Okay. Not sure what the difference is.
I don't know.
By the way,
I don't know, right? I'll let you know.
I agree that Eddie Glob's talk was very, very good and really spoke to a lot of issues that are important to us. I would just add one thing, though. It's not just talking about the value of diversity to us. It's not a moral issue. I mean, to the extent that it's limited to being just a moral type of issue, it's not very strong. It will weaken at the first stress. I like to look at diversity in terms of what is it that the people that we are bringing from the outside in can contribute to our community, right? What skills, what knowledge, what resources can they bring? And look at that from the standpoint of the immigrants that are so demonized in this country. Many of those people are incredible in terms of their education, in terms of their willingness to work, their commitment to hard work, the whole thing. And they bring something to us. It's not just that it's good for us to support immigrants coming into our country, but they give us something that even under stress we can see we need, and the possibility of backsliding is reduced. So, not saying that it wasn't a great talk. I just that was one piece that I think was missed by both Eddie Glob as well as the new executive director of the MMA, who did discuss diversity and equity as important goals of the organization. So anyway, my 2 cents.
I did have the opportunity to attend one of the DEI deep dive working sessions, which was incredibly informative for me. I kind of sat in the back quietly. But they made it really a safe place for people to talk and engage. But they described DEI in this way. Diversity is you've been invited to the party. Equity is everybody has a dance partner. And inclusion is you feel safe enough to cut loose. And I think that inclusion is the first two are often check boxes, right? It's performative. But inclusion is that people feel actually invited and able to be heard. Their voices are heard. They don't have to say, I'm still talking. They may even be asked to participate and they feel safe to participate. And I think we miss that. I think often in just our interactions when we invite people. It really isn't an inventory of who's there. It's a space to make them feel comfortable and willing to be a community member. They're part of the community. So anyway, that's what I got out of that.
Okay. Anything else? No? Let's go on to public comment. Devin, do we have anyone interested in talking to us?
Thank you for joining us for public comment. This is an opportunity for us to hear your perspective on the issues in Brookline that matter to you. Each person speaking tonight is limited to 3 minutes. You don't need to use the entire time, but you may if you like. Once 15 minutes has been met, there is an opportunity at the conclusion of the select board's business for additional comments. Members of the public sometimes raise questions during public comment. We may be able to provide a quick answer, but are more likely to work with staff to get a thorough answer and respond over email. We'll let you know when you have 30 seconds remaining, and when your time is up, please conclude your remarks at that time. If you have more to say, you are welcome to send an email to board members expressing your thoughts in greater detail. At this time, we have 12 virtual attendees and 1 in person. No one has signed up in advance. I'm going to take an opportunity to check the Q&A and see if anyone is raising their hand. It appears there's no public comment this evening.
Mm,
We used up all the time anyway.
I know. Yeah. Yeah.
Your time doesn't count.
Okay. Next, miscellaneous items. We have items 3A through 3M. Unless anyone wants to discuss any particular item, I'd like to take these in omnibus fashion. Anyone want to discuss any particular item? Seeing none, no one raising their hands. I move approval of items 3A through 3M of the miscellaneous calendar. All in favor, please indicate by saying aye. John Van Scoyac,
Aye.
Miriam Ashkenazi,
Aye.
Michael Sandman,
Aye.
Paul Warren,
Aye.
and chair votes aye.
Chair Green, can I ask a
Yes.
quick question that
Sure.
does not change my vote at all? This is probably for the town administrator. Sorry, I neglected to ask this question earlier, but I just
Okay.
noted it. So 3I,
Mhm.
which is the pre-qualification committee for filing sub bidders related to the Pierce School project.
Right.
Is this related to the work that's being done to put the package together for, getting bids on the demolition of the school? Or is this a separate type of item?
It's mainly the electrical trade contractors that are brought in to sort of separate the new building or the old historical building from the newer concrete structures.
Okay,
And, these contractors will be used as we go into the next phases of the project.
okay, so it's limited to just that, something like that.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect, thank you.
Okay. Next, our calendar. First, authorization to hire or promote in the fire department. We have the following positions in the fire department where they are seeking an authorization to hire or promote. Number 1, Chief of Operations, which is an executive officer. I guess T-175 is the classification, or whatever it means. Okay. We're also looking for a deputy chief. I think this is a promotion. A captain, probably also a promotion, and a lieutenant.
Right.
Any discussion? I see Chief Sullivan.
Chief Sullivan here, yep.
Anything else you want to add, Chief Sullivan?
Chief, you're on mute.
Yep, no, we have a retirement of our Chief of Operations, Chief O'Connell. You've all been invited to have a meet and greet with him on Friday at the Public Safety Building. And these other promotional opportunities as a result of that retirement. And that's it.
Great. Okay, any other questions from the select board? Okay, I move approval of the authorization to hire request for the following positions in the fire department: Chief of Operations, Executive Officer, Deputy Chief, Captain, and Lieutenant. All in favor, please indicate by saying aye. John Van Scoyac,
Aye.
Miriam Ashkenazi,
Aye.
Michael Sandman,
Aye.
Paul Warren,
Aye.
and chair votes aye. Okay, proposed procedures and signage fees for ZBA cases. Director of Regulatory Planning, Polly Selko, will review the proposed procedural changes for the Board of Appeals notice process and related imposed fee to provide site signage. So the question is, making changes for the following departmental fee schedule under the provisions of Mass General Laws, Chapter 40, Section 22F, non-illuminated sign fee. Ms. Selko,
Yes,
you have anything
Polly
to add?
Selko, Director of Regulatory Planning. Actually, the first fee that I want to speak to you about has to do with lawn and placard signs. We are very excited about the opportunity to create even more transparency in our Zoning Board of Appeals process. And you may have seen this in other towns or other communities when you were traveling. And that is to ask the applicants to actually put up a sign that says that they are going to be going to the Planning Board and the Board of Appeals. And the placard is going to have a QR code on it, which people can photograph and go to a website where we will have all the information about the proposal. It does mean that we'll have to ask the applicants to cover the cost of the sign, which we think is fairly minimal. It should be around $25. And so we ask your support in this new procedure. And we hope not only will you support the procedure, but also the fact that we have to ask for an additional fee of approximately $25 or whatever the cost of the sign would be.
Okay, thank you. Mike?
Polly, I assume this is at least partly in response to the concerns that some residents have expressed about the construction that's going on Boylston Street opposite the reservoir. Is that
No,
a fair
no,
thing to
this
say?
is
No?
something that's actually, it's been in the works for quite a while.
Oh, it has. Okay, good.
Yes, it has. It is not in response to that. And of course, that was actually a project from 2018.
Yep.
We were able to send people the plans, people who were interested in that, we could send them the plans for that project.
Right. Okay.
Oh, okay.
Paulie, thank you. First, I think this is a brilliant idea. Thank you for bringing it forward. The more transparency and access for the public to understand projects and what they can expect, and, you know, be able to get more information is extremely helpful. So I think it's a great idea. And I fully support the $25 to asking them. I'm sure it's not a problem. I'm curious, how big, is there a standard size that you're going to have? Are you going to tell them how big the sign has to be? or-
We are actually going to have the signs made ourselves.
Oh, okay.
And
Great.
we are going to fill them in, and they will be
Oh.
obligated to pick the sign up from us and to put
Perfect.
it on their property.
So you're in full control of the
Yeah.
quality of the sign, and the information will be consistent for the community.
Exactly.
And it will all link back to, where is it going to go to?
Well, it's going to go to the planning department website.
Okay. For project-specific information.
Absolutely.
Great. Very good, Paulie. I think it's a great idea. Thank you.
Okay, any other, Mike,
I
Marion?
just want to express my agreement in that. I think that people are visual and they are in their cars a lot. And this is an actually effective way to get their attention so that they can see what's happening. And I think that I agree, the cost is minimal, and I understood it is that they would be producing it, so it will be uniform. So I
Great.
appreciate it.
Okay. Seeing no further discussion, I'd like to move approval of the proposed procedures and signing fees for ZBA cases. All in favor, please indicate by saying aye. John Van Scoyac,
Aye.
Miriam Ashkenazi,
Aye.
Mike Sandman,
Aye.
Paul Warren.
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Okay, now. we're gonna
The
have fun.
second item is.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Let's
is
just get one more.
even-
We're not done.
is-
Application filing. fee.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's very minimal change. And that is, we thought that it would be a good idea to have a different fee when people applied for a sign application if a sign was under 10 square feet and if it was over 10 square feet. It turns out that this has actually, rather than making things simple, has led to complications, and people don't know which fee they should pay. So we'd like to just make it uniform and say that the fee is the same for both, which would be $125, which is what it is for signs over 10 square feet.
It's at the bottom of page 131 in the packet.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I
missed
can't
it.
hear you too
Oh,
well.
sorry. I was just pointing the other select board members to the location of the proposed change in the packet, which is
Yes.
at the bottom of page 131.
Yep.
Thank you.
Which I, again, since I have the mic, will say seems quite reasonable.
I agree. Any further discussion? Okay, so, and this is the last item on your topic, Polly?
That's it.
Okay, I don't want to make a mistake again. Okay, I move approval of the question. Oh, some specific language?
Yeah, there's
Okay, I
some.
move to raise the fee for non-illuminated sign applications for a sign under 10 square feet by $25 to $125 to equal the fee for a non-illuminated sign above 10 square feet. Okay, all in favor, please indicate by saying aye. John Van Scoyac,
Aye.
Miriam Ashkenazi,
Aye.
Michael Sandman,
Aye.
Paul Warren,
Aye.
and chair votes aye. Thank you, Polly.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Polly.
Okay. Next, our communication policy. So this is something that came up in our workshop in July, or was it June?
Mhm.
June of last year. And various drafts have been put together. And this is the final draft that we have. It's not a final draft, I'm sorry. The most recent draft we have. And what I'd like to do is to have a discussion of the draft and proposed changes. And then at a later time, it'll come back and we'll either discuss it more or adopt it.
Okay.
So, Mike, you want to start?
Sure. So first of all,
Wait, let me just
Yep.
mention one other thing. You should have received, or you did receive, notice that in the packet, there are proposed edits to the sign policy and other information that should be the basis for our discussion. I mean, it came in late, but still, to the extent that, we can use that, we should use it.
so first of all, I think this is on balance, this is really a very good idea. And particularly, I think the idea or codifying the idea that will, on a rotating schedule, be responsible for answering letters that come in from residents. I think that's really important. And I think it's also a good idea not to codify specifically how it's going to happen, but I would hope that we can figure out a mechanism, and ask people to follow it and schedule it. The one thing I was concerned about, and I know that Paul was concerned about it as well, is the first sentence in the next section on individual members of the select board shall not direct or otherwise influence town staff in the performance of their duties. And certainly, none of us are interested in directing the town staff, but influencing on the other hand is something that we all do all the time. And so we have to find some balance here. Perhaps there's some other language that we can use that will get to the point that where I can appreciate that staff doesn't want anyone really to interfere with the way they're doing their jobs, but we do in many ways seek actively, and we should seek actively to influence what staff does. The other element of this, of course, is that we're speaking about the select board. There are 255 town meeting members and 30 advisory committee members and 63,000 residents. So all of them, to a greater or lesser extent, ask staff members to do something. And you might want to think about, okay, now, is there a policy for responding to when town meeting members do? You're not going to be able to get town meeting to adopt a policy. But that term influence is something that I was concerned about. And I think Paul has far more depth on this than I have.
So, okay, there are three parts to this. It's a procedure, right?
Yeah.
Protocol. Three parts of the protocol. I'd like to talk or discuss each part separately.
Okay.
Do you want to start with the third part, which is what you raised?
Well, why don't we start with the first one and work our way through the document? So what was the first one was the inbound rotating communication, right?
Yeah, communications to the select board.
So
um,
I did have a question about that.
Yeah.
So,
Well, let me say what I suggest, which may
Okay.
answer your question.
okay,
So, I suggest we add to this section the following. This protocol is not intended to restrict informal and reasonable telephonic communications while a select board member is out and around town, or other modes of communication to select board members which may not be subject to the public records law. I just want to make clear that, we communicate with people all the time out in the street, and it shouldn't be, it should be obvious that this protocol doesn't apply to those things, but I just want to make it clear that.
Yeah, so I feel funny about it. We're elected, we're politicians, we're elected, we have constituencies. They call us and reach out and ask for help from time to time. And I don't think that this particular issue is that this portion of the policy would be addressing that. This portion is an email comes into, selectboard.gov, and Devin distributes it to the full select board. And it may be appropriate that there is a response. There should be at least an acknowledgement, thank you for sending, but there could be a complicated topic. The question I have is, one individual may not be sufficient to be able to cobble together a cohesive response.
Yeah.
And any work that we do to try to create a response would potentially violate the open meeting law. So that's a concern I have, right? I can think of, there's any number of things that have come in that have been pretty complicated. And I see various people on the board will respond, or sometimes they'll copy us or not, or the recipient will forward it back. There's very different responses from individuals with different perspectives. And I think that's okay. So I worry that we're trying to set a policy on something that is very difficult to create a policy on, telling you how you can respond and when.
Okay, you're raising a question that's really related to the second section of this protocol.
Okay.
The
maybe
first
I-
section really is just defining what we're talking about when we use the word communications.
Yeah.
And then it's used throughout. So I assume there's, or is
It's a
there
response
any?
to Paul.
Okay, and is there any response to the idea of adding that additional sentence
that's
to?
fine.
Okay, so can we go on to
Yeah.
the second part? Okay, yes.
Okay, so when I think I was the one who raised this at the workshop, and it's not the first time. And I think the main point is I want residents to get some response, even if it's thank you, we're looking at it.
Yeah.
Right.
When it comes to giving people a more detailed response, then each of us indeed should feel free to do what we're elected to do, which is to engage in discussion with them on a one-on-one basis without, circulating it to everybody. I think it's important to keep Chaz informed as to what we're saying, telling people, but the most important thing is, I know that when I've received letters, emails, and I've responded disagreeing with the person who sent it, the typical response that I get back is, thank you.
Mhm.
And that's really important for us to appear to be, and not just appear, but actually be responsive to what people are asking for.
Miriam?
Can I, because I think Paul's points are well considered. I think at the same time, Mike is right. I mean, right now, we all get an email from the box. I don't have the bandwidth. I rarely ever answer these folks. But Mike answers them quite a lot. So I don't know that Mike's answered them. I think at the very least, we need an automatic reply that says, thank you for your email. The select board will review it. Due to open meeting law, there may be some difficulty answering your specific question. A select board member might reach out to you individually. If they don't, we want you to know they have still seen your email.
Right. So the comments that I made that are in the packet, which you may not have read,
I haven't seen that.
I think they address that. And what I tried to do is to, like Mike said, everyone should know that that we received
Read
their,
them. I mean,
right, and that, they're being read and someone
Yeah.
is going to deal with it. So I just added that, unfortunately, Devin, I'm sorry, you would have another job under this. And So I'm saying that the select board office will forward any communication received that requires a response, because not all communications require a response,
Mm.
to an individual select board member who, one, serves as a chair or liaison to a board or commission relevant to the communication. Two, has been assigned a warrant article for presentation to town meeting that is the subject of the communication. Three, has some level of expertise in the subject of the communication. Or four, has expressed an interest in the subject of the communication. So, what this says is that the select board will just identify the appropriate select board member
Mm.
to prepare a response. And help that select board member by identifying maybe town staff who knows something about the issue that they can reach out to. Now, in my thing, it says that this does not preclude any other member of the select board from responding to a communication individually.
Mm.
But then as a courtesy and to coordinate communications from the select board, such individual members shall notify the select board office of those communications. So, I mean, that's my attempt.
good.
Are we able, so let's say that it's my turn to be the rotating responder.
Well, this is not suggesting a rotation. It's.
Oh, there wouldn't be a rotation.
No,
would-
no.
Yeah, I
would-
put Bernard's edits up on the board if
Oh,
everyone wants to
okay.
take a look at
That's
them. Okay, I can make it big.
I don't have my computer's broken, so I'm working off a packet that included thing. Okay, so there wouldn't be a rotation.
No, Devin would pick out the person who has sort of the expertise or really knows something about
Okay.
the topic.
Okay,
I might suggest that for some of these, yes, I think, for example, Kate, who tends to monitor the box, would be able to route, especially with some guidance from staff. But I think too, just given the, you're all in your awareness, like for some of the back end of that, like, someone who has particular interests, someone who might be involved in this, we don't want to guess wrong. I think it would be helpful for us if, for example, the chair were responsible for routing that. If we get an email where it's not immediately apparent who would be most interested in responding to, we would send it to the chair. and the
Okay.
Chair would may have to.
I think that's
Yeah.
smart. I guess my question is, when there is a response, are we limited in could we copy the rest of the select board so we know what the response is? Is that a violation of open meeting law?
So the trick is you can't deliberate. So
you could-
you could send an email, but the trick is then no one could respond.
Yeah.
To you, okay, so it'd be a BCC or something, and don't respond.
When I emailed the board as a whole, I mean, and even then, I think, I think town council is probably, it would say, err on the side of no,
Right.
because you would still be expressing your view on a topic to your colleagues, and perhaps, if it were just, the same as like a remark in public, then
Right.
maybe not so much. But if it were, a substantive policy matter, it would be tough.
Right. But I do think it's important to know how we're responding.
Yeah.
So that if we get contacted again, well, Mike said, and Bernard said.
Yeah, and that's
I
where
hear that.
Yeah, that's where I think we have to kind of suss out the line there and have that.
Yeah.
I'll take that back to town council and
Yep.
have that conversation
Yep.
and figure it out. Because I agree, you don't want to be in a situation
Yep.
where, a single select board member's public, something that is a public record, a
Right.
conversation back to a constituent,
Right.
would be somehow unavailable to you. But also you want to avoid a situation where you're inviting the risk of being, alleged to be.
Yeah, I understand.
So one issue, the issue that raises is that no one select board member really can speak for the select board.
Right,
Because, we're a unitary body.
Yeah.
And you only speak by, meetings, through meetings like this. But still, other select board members need to know what an individual member is saying, because we may not agree and want to respond. And so, I mean, we have to figure out a way of getting around the open meeting law with not getting around, but
I think you
but-
meant to say
yeah.
that.
Yeah, well, you'd never say.
Need to find
Adhere
a
to
way
effectively.
Open meeting law.
to
Comply.
comply with the open meeting law without destroying, our function, our operations.
There is a twist on this, that it may not be a direct request to us on the inbox, but, oftentimes there are questions posed on the TMMA list. And they really need a response from the select board. And, you know, I mean, I think I've responded to some of those things sometimes. I know that Mike has, Bernard has, I think Chaz through a surrogate has.
Mm.
And maybe I think everybody has. How do we deal with that? Do we treat that like a request to, and it just needs to be forwarded to Devin? Hey, Devin, heads up, or?
So
You're talking about if it's to an individual select?
Well, so often often what happens on the TMMA is the TMMA will say, hey, a select board member, please provide a perspective.
I think we should ignore that.
I don't say anything when it happens.
and I-
They know better.
Right. And what I try and do with that, my general view on that, and I have done otherwise and think it was a mistake on my part, is that TMMA is a private entity. The only reason those emails are now public is because the public records request that pulls emails from public, from publicly available sources, which are really your email boxes. To the extent any of you use a brooklinema.gov email address to subscribe to it. I want to be solicitous of the fact that when I took the job, I asked, am I allowed to be on TMMA? And the answer I was given was no.
No.
And I want to respect that town meeting has that forum and that space. But I also think that then creates a countervailing an expectation that we want to set, which is, generally speaking, I don't think we on staff should be engaged in those conversations. For one thing, because they're so one-sided, because we can't see their responses.
I agree. I guess I'm not talking about staff responding. I'm talking
Yeah.
about the select, like sometimes, and I know, I just want to say briefly, just 1 minute, that
You're still talking.
on the, I didn't want to say it.
I may stop you, Paul, be careful.
I know. But there have been times when generally when now that I'm on the select board, I reply or I post something, it's because I can see something is there's a lot of misinformation. It's going in the wrong direction and it's snowballing. And if it continues, it's going to be difficult to undo.
Yeah,
Bernard,
yeah, Mary. But, and we have to be
Response,
so
direct
careful.
response.
Yeah.
So what I do, take it or leave it, if I feel like that's happening, because TMMA knows better. They know we are all on that listserv. They know we are bound by OML. So when they ask us those questions, I just say, we can't answer. But what I will do is answer that person individually.
Mhm.
And if they post my answer, well, that's on them. I haven't violated OML. And oftentimes, frankly, they don't, which I find very interesting. But it does often stop as you have, this kind of snowballing.
Right.
Yeah. So I think generally we need to avoid the listserv.
Oh, I'm
I mean,
100%.
Yeah, but we can sort of give out the message or convey the message that when you want to talk to the select board, talk to the select board,
Yep.
through the office. And then we will respond as a body, through our procedures, to you if it's appropriate. I think the listserv, separate from the fact that crazy goes on there, but separate from that, I mean, it's just a very, very, it's a very, very difficult forum for the select board to have a meaningful, useful, and good response to what goes on there. So, John.
Well, I wish our staff well in trying to consolidate the various suggestions they're going to get tonight, because they are many, and they go in a few cases in somewhat different directions. I'll cite just one example. With all due respect, I couldn't disagree more with Mike in that actually, I don't even need to say this, because it turns out this idea of a rotating schedule was dropped, and that was my point that I wanted to make here. I never thought that the rotating schedule would really work, because, I mean, all of us as individual select board members, we want as much as possible, when we are so inclined, to be in communication with people in the town when they have questions, when they have concerns, when they address the select board, and that is not to say we feel a compulsion to be the person answering the email. It's just that we feel a compulsion to that the email be answered, that the person not feel nobody heard me. I didn't even get a response from anybody on the select board. I didn't even get a response from anybody at town hall. So that the person be heard. But also that if there is anything that I, as an individual, can bring to the knowledge of that individual, the person who wrote to us, as long as I do it in a way that observes certain boundaries. And among the boundaries is that I make it absolutely clear I am not speaking for the board. I'm just one member of the board. In case they need this reminder, make it absolutely clear that if there is going to be any action taken by the board on this matter that you have brought to our attention, it will have to be by vote of the board in a public session. And you would be welcome to speak, in public comment in advance and to address whatever, it is that you've raised at a public session, and to use your powers of persuasion to, convince the board of your position. And furthermore, that I don't, that I avoid any suggestion that I can, at their beck and call, get them answers from department heads to their questions. Maybe I can, and maybe I can't. And I have to be very, careful in the number of times that I try to take a question all the way to a department head. And I almost never do it directly. If I think that this person has raised a question that maybe desperately needs some kind of a response from town hall, and that could be either from administration at town hall, Chaz, or a deputy to Chaz, or one of the department heads, I've always felt that has to go through Chaz and the deputies to Chaz, so that they can decide, is this worth asking the department head to take some time out of his or her day and formulate a response, and send, and then we will get that response to the individual. But not that I should take on that task myself of trying to get a department head to address somebody's individual questions, because I'm very conscious of the fact that there's 5 of us. And furthermore, I'm very conscious of the fact that our town administrator hires the department heads. And they are answerable to our town administrator for their job performance. They're not answerable to me. And I don't want them to be answerable to me for their job performance. And I don't want anyone who writes to the select board getting the idea that if they browbeat a department head in an email to a member of the select board, that they might convince that member of the select board that that person should be fired and can't do their job. I don't want anybody to be thinking that is the way to get responses from town hall, to try to sort of in a public forum, openly put on the spot department heads for their performance. I think we can and do get really good performance from our department heads, but I don't think we're ever going to get it by, in public forums, finger pointing or trying to sort of assess who was to blame for this or that complaint, by a person. So as I say, I think a lot of this is common sense. I put my particulars into a memo. I hope some of them are useful. But I do think we should have a policy. The number one criticism I've had raised to me on the idea of this policy is aimed at the sentence. Just as the select board directs its boards and commissions to speak with one voice, the select board should do the same when addressing matters of policy. They don't like, the people who've called me about this don't like the phrase, just as the select board directs its boards and commissions to speak with one voice. And they interpret that as being, the boards and commissions are under our thumb, and there can be no disagreement expressed among members of those boards and commissions. And we know those boards and commissions too well to think that that actually should be true. I've suggested we take that sentence out of the policy.
Okay, first of all, you're going into the third.
Okay, yeah, I'm sorry for jumping ahead, but I hadn't had a
Don't mean
chance to
be,
speak, so, yeah.
rigid.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I get you.
some of those concerns are addressed in at least my proposed language. Mike?
So I just want to, just a very quick thing, John, the idea of rotating is not sacred with me. The only thing I want is for residents to get an answer from somebody.
And we agree. Yeah.
So
yeah,
I think we're in
yeah.
agreement.
You know, I like this idea of,
Okay, wait a minute.
I was going to say, but what
Yeah.
someone had brought up something I want to modify. And again, I don't have all the edits in front of me, Bernard, but I want to build on what this section, the one you're talking about. Miriam had suggested at least an automatic response. And I think an automatic response that sets the expectation of, we've got it. This is how we're going to handle your message. You can expect a response from somebody. You may also get a response from individual board members, but know that we've received it. And we do get a lot of email, but you should hear from us. I think that alone would be helpful to know that it didn't go into a black hole, that no one ever responded. So I like that idea.
Yeah, okay. I don't know, how else do you want to discuss part 2? Okay, so my comments are in the packet. I think John has comments with respect to part 2 also. And
I just gave my comments. So someone who needs to record them because I didn't submit
Right.
that.
Devon's on
Okay,
the.
thank
on
you,
the-
Devin.
So we'll come back with a revised protocol at some point with respect to those 2, and let's go to part 3 now. Okay, this is the difficult one. And let me just read you what I did, because I think it addressed Paul's concerns as well as other concerns I've heard with respect to this policy. I start off with saying, the select board is a unitary body and speaks only as a body at properly noticed meetings. So preface. Okay, free and open communication between individual members of the select board and town staff is important to the work of the select board and is of value to the town staff. Such individual select board members should be clear to themselves and to town staff that they are communicating as an individual select board member, not representing the select board as a body, unless such authority to speak for the board has been given. So, I mean, I think that addresses the issue of how individual members of the select board can communicate with town staff and others without, there being a sense that town staff's being put under pressure from the select board to, comply with what the select board member is saying. Next, select board members will often need information from specific town departments to be informed or to respond to a resident's complaint or suggestion. Select board members seeking such information from town departments shall email the relevant department head or staff member or contact them by telephone. I think that we should be allowed to do that. I mean, and we expect everyone to be reasonable and not, be difficult with staff members. As a courtesy and to give the town administrator an opportunity to intervene to avoid any inadvertent interference or intentional interference with the operations of town government, the town administrator shall be notified of all such communications. So if there's a communication that a select board member is having with a town staff member, and the select board member may be a little too
Zealous?
Zealous, right, too zealous. Town administrator will know that communication went out, and if he hears that the select board member is too zealous, he can intervene with the select board member as well as assure the town staff person that everything's cool. And then finally, the other 2 bullets there, I think, are basically the same as in the draft. Select board members should make requests for information well in advance of when the information is needed in order to be respectful of town department staff's busy schedules. Department heads should appropriately prioritize requests from select board members so that the select board member will have sufficient time to review and utilize the information. So, those are my suggestions. I mean, John has other suggestions you want to?
Well, no, I jumped ahead and I jumped ahead and so you heard it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then we have to remember it too.
So Bernard, you reworded the first bullet,
Yeah,
and it really gave it as advice on communication, right? Versus strict
And the second bullet too.
Yeah, in the second bullet. I mean, I get, my problem was with the first bullet. I think everybody, if anybody didn't see my stuff in the packet, it's in there.
Yeah, and I think, you made some, valid comments with respect to, the restrictions that that language placed on select board members, just sort of normal communication with, our town staff members.
Right. And also,
So-
I think that we don't want to so formalize the relationships and communication between the select board and staff that you inhibit the communication.
Yeah.
I think your suggestions are good. I didn't, they're off the screen, but anyway.
What I'd like to happen, like for select board office to do, I guess that's Chaz and Devin, is to take, the comments from this discussion and come up with a separate draft. And that we can discuss and at some point vote on. And again, the point of this is not to restrict select board communication with the public or with town staff, but to make sure that it is done in a way that's not disruptive or that gives a wrong impression as to what we're doing and what our powers are as individual select board members or even as a body. So, Mike?
So just thinking to myself, is that homework that you're comfortable with?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, I should have asked that.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think these are all valid points. And I do think it's really important for us to state as staff, right, that we rely on the select board, not just for guidance, but you are, as Paul pointed out, you're elected officials. You're who people often come to. You're the first line. And so it is really important for us to hear from you what people are saying, what people's concerns are, so that we can address them. So we really do want to have open and clear lines of communication with you. My ask to you is always just, if you email a department head, copy me.
Right. We do. And we need to be very conscious of the power dynamic, right? There is a bit of a power
That's
dynamic
right.
going on.
That's right.
And, for one, and for two, I think that it's important that, that we respect time. And as John mentioned, you could have 5 select board members going to the same person and they're just not aware, and we're individually not aware of it.
Right.
So I think that it's helpful. And Chaz, I would also say, in closing, that it's important that staff feel comfortable to either give feedback to board members or to you to say, this one might have went too far, we got to back off a little bit, or I'm underwater, can we get some more time? I think that's important to be able to have that open feedback.
Yeah.
So there should be, you should communicate that point to staff in some way, because it's very important that they not feel that they can't or push back when we're pushing too hard.
I do think it is, but Paul is right to recognize there is a power dynamic there. It is very hard for department heads to say no to you guys. But what I encourage them to do is, if there is a situation, they can call me and then I'll call you and say no to you, in a polite way.
Yeah.
Yeah, Mike?
So some of this, I think certainly one of the observations that we'd make, Chaz, is that you have right from the beginning been very protective of staff, and that's very important. So it does bring back the question of, well, how about the 255 town meeting members who think that they can get answers from staff at the drop of a hat? And that's not quite fair. They don't all feel that way, and they don't all ask at the drop of a hat. But certainly there are town meeting members who, when they get hot about something, will push pretty hard. And the same is true of advisory committee members, many of whom are town meeting members after all. So I'm just wondering what kind of mechanism we can put in place to help with that.
Well, I think this is one area where, as you pointed out at the beginning, you don't have direct control over those folks. Or sure,
Yeah.
they're co-equal
Right,
branch of government. And we recognize that, there are times when there are 255 people. Some people are new, some people have been, engaged in the community for years and have different expectations of people's time. And we try and take people as they are, and we try and be respectful to them, even if they're in a situation where maybe they have unrealistic expectations of us. But what we try and say is, we try and be responsive to all the community members who reach out to us to the extent that we can. We either route them appropriately. I got, for example, a compliment about something that someone did, and I routed that appropriately. I got a complaint about this week about an interaction that was had with a public facing department, and I forwarded that along. And these are just from people I don't know, people who have found my email address, and we do that regardless of who the person is. And so what I try and say to staff on that front is, the difference, to the extent that town meeting members and advisory committee members are different, is that they do have roles and responsibilities in government. And we should be solicitous of those, that if they're legislators and they need information to do their job as legislators, we should try and get that information to them appropriately, particularly, and we recognize too, the advisory committee has one of the more important roles as the legislative body. They present the budget. So to the extent that we have information that we can provide them to help them do that job, we need to prioritize that appropriately. And that's kind of how we balance that out. And we say, you do need to prioritize asks from the community, but you also need to be, cognizant of your time, that if all 255 members expect concierge service, they need to understand we can't provide that. We will do what we can to ensure that you have the materials and the knowledge you need to do your jobs. That's kind of how I treat that relationship.
Okay.
I'll just
Wait, John?
Yes, right. If people don't mind, I just want to make a comment to put this in some perspective. So I've been on the select board for 4 years, and that means I've been through 4 election cycles, and with every election cycle, the board has changed. And I think it pays to keep that in mind. And during my time on the select board, I was present for the retirement of 2 leaders of the DPW, who between the 2 of them had been leaders of the DPW for 100 years. Peter Ditto and Eddie Pap Sturgeon, or they had been in the DPW for 100 years. I mean, I couldn't believe that when I heard it, but they had started out in their early 20s, and they were over 70, and they were both retiring. So select boards come and go. And every time there's a new person on the select board, or persons, it's a new select board. And I think it helps to imagine that person turning to, some of the rest of the members who have been there for maybe 1, 2, 3, or 4 years, and saying, what are the expectations, of select board members in terms of their communications with one another, how they behave with their colleagues on the select board, and how they conduct themselves vis-a-vis somebody calls them up their first week on the select board and says, I'm really angry about, something that didn't happen and didn't meet my expectations. Do they assume for themselves, like, well, I'm going to get to the bottom of this, and I'm going to call that person right now and find out, what went wrong, and or do they have to sort of understand, there's a right way to sort of handle that complaint, and, there's a wrong way to handle that complaint. So let's figure out what is the right way and what is the wrong way, and then let's all try to make this work as smoothly as possible. I think that's what this is all about.
Mary?
I was just going to add that the very first conversation I had with Mel Kleckner when I got on the select board was, he said, I ask one thing, which is if you email a department head to ask them something, just CC me. Just always CC me.
Great idea.
And that has just been my practice since then. So I'm just passing that along.
Yeah. What I thought John was going to say, and maybe he did say it, but not as direct as I'm going to say it. Written policies and procedures are important for that very reason, so that as new boards come on, they have a sort of history and some background, so that they don't have to reinvent the wheel every turnover.
Actually, so the advisory committee has sort of an orientation document that, for better or worse, is intended to give people some background. And this sort of thing and some of the other policies that we have, perhaps we need to have a formal, and after the election, have a short orientation with new members, because we'll have 2 new members this year.
At least one. At any rate, I asked Devin to create a folder on our webpage of policies and procedures. So that's one way that we can do this.
There's a model handbook that just came out from the MMA for select board members this week.
Really?
Online. Circulated to them. And I it's your point's well taken. And Paul will know because he's technically my first new select board member. You know, the offer that I make and that I will make when papers close is that if candidates are running, old or new, I offer them time
Right.
in advance before the election because I believe transitions are important, win or lose. So anyone who wants to come, any declared candidate who wants to come see me before the election has the opportunity to come up, meet the members of the team, have an understanding of what does the select board actually do. And then after the election, I try and make a point, you know, immediately after the election to call in the folks who have won election and say, here's your key card, but also here's what you do. Here's-
You know,
Huh.
the MMA also just published a new select board handbook that covers all the roles and responsibilities and duties, everything you've ever wanted to know about select boards. And that's up on the MMA site. They just published it over the weekend. It's quite good.
Okay, and Devin, Chaz, you know what to do.
We have our marching
And,
orders.
you know, make sure that, what we're proposing in this, I think it should be called a policy, not procedure, but whatever, you know, or protocol.
The essence.
Make sure that, you know, it's gonna work. It's not gonna be or burdensome to Devin, to Chaz, to Kate, or whoever. And that, you know, it's coherent.
As long as we don't have a rotating select board member answer emails, because I did not want to do that.
Yeah,
You don't
As you
have-
say, all I want
that's
is.
that's my concern too.
I thought it was a way of spreading the burden, but you're right.
No, I
Both ways.
appreciate that, but
Okay, so, okay, let me get back on. Next, okay, we also have we're gonna have a, detailed discussion of our next item, which is our
there's
our
squirrels.
budget.
No,
Heat.
heat expansion.
The heat's working. It's good news.
More than I can say at my house.
Okay. Okay, departmental budget presentation guidance. Two things here. First of all, the letter that goes out to department heads that we've used over the last few years is one thing. And I just proposed an addition to that, which is related to what I'm going to propose as a way to deal with concern, as Paul's concern, right, but also other people's concern, that the board's goals and priorities are not being conveyed to town staff in the budget process sufficiently. Right now, we have this thing called goals and objectives, which, you know, come out in the next few days, I'm told. But, you know, today, right now, it's halfway through the budget process.
Mm,
So what value is that?
right.
And, you know, we've struggled with this for years, ever since I've been on the board. You know, how do you make this thing useful? It's better than it was in the beginning, but it's really not good enough. So what I'd like to suggest, and it's in the packet, is that, well, first of all, with respect to the memo that goes to the departments, I'd like to suggest language that adds, or like to suggest adding the question, to what extent were you able to consider the select board's goals and priorities in your budget request? So that we sort of make sure that what we're saying in our, you know, goals and objectives or whatever we call it, you know, is being listened to and is being acted upon or rejected if that's appropriate by departments. Now, you know, this is something I think, you know, we can't really do effectively until next year. But what I'd like to suggest is that we, I'm going to just read the thing that's in the packet. We need to improve our process for informing the town administrator and town staff of select board goals, objectives, and priorities. The current practice is that our goals and objectives are not produced until the middle of the budget process. I propose creating a document called Goals and Priorities, right? So goals, you know, is one thing, but also, you know, what are our priorities in carrying out those goals? So I think those are the two key concepts. To focus on long-term goals and select board priorities that can more effectively inform the budget process in accordance with the following timeline. And so what I'm suggesting is that in July, the select board take up the previous fiscal year's goals and priorities as modified by deliberations at town meeting, you know, because town meeting will tell us whether some of our goals are met or not practical or whatever. And we will do a first draft of next year's goals and priorities document. And that document will be, I guess, finalized in early September and given to the town administrator to include in a document called budget forms, right? To town departments in order to inform them of the select board's thinking. Okay, so as they're going through the budget process, they know what our goals are, our priorities are, and can, determine whether they are good priorities, whether they're workable, and to the extent that they're workable, incorporate them in, their budget request to the town administrator. So in January, our goals and priorities document can be revised based on those departmental inputs, town administrators' inputs, and also factoring in the long-range financial forecast that we get usually in December. Okay, so I mean, if revenues are collapsing, maybe our priorities will change. If they're expanding, maybe they'll change also. So in March and April, when we're doing the budget hearings, that goals and priorities document can be used in our discussions with departments, right? Are these goals and priorities reasonable? Can you do them? Have you incorporated them in your budget requests so far? And that information, of course, is conveyed to the advisory committee and ultimately to town meeting. So I think that's a way of making sure that, number one, we formulate what our goals and priorities are. And number two, get it into the budget process in a way that, can be incorporated or rejected and, carried out to our satisfaction. Mike?
Yeah, I think that's all fine. I think we've had workshops that I found to be, at least from my perspective, very useful in terms of thinking about what our priorities should be. And what I think we ought to be doing is scheduling those workshops in sync with the schedule that you've got. So we need to have a workshop in September. We need to have another one towards the end of the year when the financial forecast is ready, because those are probably the two key points. We might want to have another one, shortly before town meeting or after town meeting when the budget is settled. But I'm not so sure about that. But certainly, we should institutionalize that schedule of at least those two.
Yeah.
Paul, I think has.
Okay.
So I love the forward-looking schedule, Bernard. I think that's exactly what we need to do. I have a question for Chaz, and then I'll have a comment. I'm concerned that we haven't provide sufficient input or prioritization around choices in the budget. We haven't had those types of conversations. We did have a conversation about the importance of creating the sustainability, hiring the sustainability director, and seeding that function. But I don't feel like we've had a substantive discussion around budgetary priorities. We've had we've kicked things around, but I don't feel like as a team, as a board, we've said, this thing is more important than that thing, or relative priority. So I guess my first question is, do you feel like you have sufficient input from the board on budget priorities?
I mean, yes and no. At times I feel like I have sufficient feedback from you, and I think particularly on day in, day out issues, year in, year out issues. I think the important thing that's missing from this current discussion is a long range horizon, is really things more on a 5-year schedule. I think this is a really interesting and appropriate way to kind of set your, year in, year out goals. But I also think that, the budget cycle is really that, a cycle, right? When town meeting closes, the first thing department heads do is they go back to the departments and say, great, we have a budget to operate this year. We're working on this year. The first thing I'm doing is starting my budget for FY26. So by the time they get it. By the time you start talking about year-long goals and priorities, we're already thinking about what FY26 is going to look like. So I do think it is helpful. It's helpful feedback, and it's helpful for then us to kind of do that work as it percolates up and we start thinking about the very conversation, cross-departmental conversations and administrative conversations in September. But I think the crucial aspect of this when it comes to goal setting is what you and I saw when we were at MMA, and they talked a little bit about strategic planning,
Right.
is a strategic plan that has definable, clear goals, and then under those goals, concrete objectives
Right.
that have the metrics to measure. Because
Right.
right now, I think we still do confuse vision, goals,
Right.
and objectives.
And so Chaz and I, separately, without having any discussion, showed up at the same session on strategic planning at the MMA, which was,
Okay.
I was glad about that. But I want to, my second half of my question is related to priorities. So I know that I've been speaking to Chaz, and maybe others have been as well, about certain things that I care about, stuff that I'm hearing from the community, stuff that I'm seeing. I'll give some examples. I don't know if I've mentioned to this group, but I certainly have shared with Chaz that a lot of our parking meters don't function. They literally are blank.
And you'll
And-
still get a ticket, by the way.
And you'll still get a ticket. So, and we heard from the gentleman last week about not accepting the quarter, but it gets into this idea of, are we maintaining parking meters? Do we have a program? Do we have sufficient funds? How are we going to make our parking meters work? I'm sure all of you, like I have gotten a lot of feedback on the conditions of our roadways. We're doing a great job at planning complete streets, but, filling potholes, making it safe for folks on bicycles. I've gotten a lot of personal feedback from constituents about sidewalks, tripping hazards. And again, I don't know if it's an issue of just we're not putting enough money into maintenance or what, but these types of conversations would be helpful because I do think they impact how Chaz structures the budget. And maybe move some money around, having a conversation about putting money aside for, I'm almost done, John. He's kind of like, it's figured out.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. The strategic plan, we should, if we think that we should initiate a strategic planning process, which I happen to think would be a good idea, we may want to set aside some funds to possibly bring in some help to facilitate that process. But so the long and the short of this is say, I don't feel like we as a group have had this discussion sufficient enough that I know that Chaz has been able to consider it.
John, Mike, I'm sorry, John.
Thanks. And
Yeah.
didn't mean to distract while you were talking. Gosh, there's so much to delve into here. But first of all, the process that we went through starting last June, July, and then we repeated and had a follow-up session in December was very high level. And I can't, recite right now every policy, decision that we made there or initiative that we agreed on there, or mission statement that we agreed on. But I would bet you that if we had them in front of us, it would be very hard to translate them into specifics of, departmental budgets. And I'll throw out one example. Okay. What are our expectations from the fire department? Well, I hope that they will, continue to put out fires, and respond to 911 calls, to get into the nitty gritty of how a department runs and what are the sort of essential functions of the department and how are they funded is a completely different exercise. It's kind of the advisory committee exercise. And it is not the same thing as this goal setting exercise that we have been through. And yet it's also very, very important. And then you get to the question of, if we're going to get into the weeds of departmental budgets, and say, we think you should be spending more money on parking meters, or we think you should be spending more money on, you name it. I wouldn't blame the department head at all if they said, show us the money. Because they've been given a certain sense of like how much money they're going to have to apply to their departmental budgets. And then furthermore, once you get sort of past that question, you confront the question of, well, wait a minute, that's just one department. If we think we should be spending more in the fire department, where do we think we should be spending less? And have we had the conversation with that department head? So we're opening the door on a lot of questions, which I would be the first to agree. We've never quite gotten a handle on. But I'm not sure that simply, writing a budget policy statement that says we should reflect our goals, we should ask the departments to reflect our goals in their budgets is going to get us there. I think it's going to require a lot more specificity than that, and maybe get us into mirroring, and I'm not sure we want to go there, the role of the advisory committee. And, I think we got to be careful to think through what is the role of the advisory committee and what is our role, and how can we be additive and not duplicative, in the roles that we play.
While Mike and Miriam are deciding who goes first.
I know. Which, by the way, speak
I
about
was trying to
distracting
get
when
your
you're trying to
attention
make a
and you
point.
flipped over
He
with-
had done it.
He put his hand up, no, but, fine.
Okay, but you
Go.
tried it out. What I'm trying to do with this proposal, and I have no, look, if.
Pride of ownership.
Yeah,
Mhm.
pride of
Well.
authorship. And if people have better idea of doing this, don't hesitate to propose it. But what I'm trying to do here is to figure out a process that can be put on paper and incorporate into our schedule, right? So that January 15, we know that we start working on goals and priorities. January 15, we receive the budget appropriation request, and we go from there. But without those specific dates on the calendar that we can begin doing specific things with, we can't really coherently inform town staff and the town administrator of what our goals and priorities are. So that's my concept here. Okay, so which one of you are going to speak first?
All right,
Okay.
so, thank you. Are you sure?
No, but go ahead.
So I think I'm going to say something my dad always used to say to me, which is you hire an expert and then you listen to them. And I think that if we start getting into the pants of our commissioners, I mean, if we start being a bee in the bonnet in the people we've hired as experts to run a department, we are going to make a mess of things, and people aren't going to want to work for us, right? Somebody at that level does not want, I can't tell Erin, Commissioner Shute, how to run her department and her budget. I mean, I could barely follow an interview I participated in today. Like it's not technically my area.
Yeah.
So I think that we have to be very careful there. And I'm going to go to the parking meters as a good example, because maybe we shouldn't actually be spending the money to fix those parking meters. Maybe all those parking meters should go to, I mean, how many people use their phone nowadays? And everyone has the app. I'm just saying,
Yeah.
it requires a more thoughtful, somebody complained, okay.
Right.
But just because that one person complained, we have to, still be very, I know I'm
I'm
not.
going to wait my
picking on
turn.
you.
I'm going to wait my
Wait.
turn.
Okay, I'm just saying as an example, I think we need to be very careful,
Yep.
right? That we are not all of a sudden going, hey, we need to fix all the parking meters. But in fact, maybe all these communities are getting rid of the quarters. It's an example.
I like quarters.
I couldn't even find a quarter if I needed one these
They
days.
sell them at banks.
Because but I use my app, right? Okay, so most people, the great majority of people these days pay for parking with the app or at the machines. Right? So, okay, I'm just saying that I think we've hired experts. We should listen to them. Now, we should give them some guidance on our priorities. I think it should be well timed for when they're making their budgets. But I think to John's point, we have to be very careful about where the line is.
Mhm.
Okay.
And so, in essence, I agree with you.
So after Mike, maybe Chaz can sort of give us some guidance as to how our, what I'm calling goals and priorities can be
Yeah.
formulated in such a way that it's not overstepping our role, but still gives us some ability to be useful.
Yeah.
In terms of the budget process. Mike.
So there were two things that I mentioned to Chaz before the meeting started. Comments on the what we're going to be asking, what we should be asking department heads to do. And one of them is not to just ask about next year, but say, where do you think the department should be in 5 years, particularly with regard to issues such as, and I'll give you one example that is very definitely not in the weeds, climate change. So if you look at the fire department, for example, how is Chief Sullivan going to manage the department towards electrifying his equipment, towards whatever else there is with that he feels he needs in order to deal with climate change in terms of resilience of his infrastructure. That's something that can't necessarily be answered in a year. Almost certainly can't be answered in a year when it comes to really any of the departments. But climate change is dealing with climate change and and the resiliency that we have to build into our infrastructure is very clearly part of what we've all talked about. Each department should be able to speak to that next year and looking forward. That's you don't need to have 20. In fact, you shouldn't have 20 priorities. You have 3 or 4 at the outside expressed to department heads, and then it really is absolutely up to them to figure out what to do with it. But I do think they need to be looking both for a year and out to 5 years, and thinking about what they will need so that we can think about what kind of revenue adjustments, adjustments within the budget might need to be made. The other thing I will say is that we are talking about only 40% of the budget, of the town's spending, I should say. And it's very important for us to have a clearer line of communication with regard to spending on the schools, which is the other 60%. And I think the discussion that we had earlier, based off of the data that John published today, is an example of, come on, folks in the schools, let's talk about this. Not just talk about it here, but talk about it with them.
Bernard, I would, before Chaz speaks, I want to, because I do think they all responded to something I said, and I think it's important for him to hear what I say before he responds or summarizes. So.
Okay, I'll let you do it.
But I'm not suggesting that. I don't want to wait to sit in front of a department head and dig into their practices, right? I'm talking about broad priorities of how we spend. Why did this come up? I sat in Chaz's office for quite a while and we talked about this. And the discussion was geared towards, we're great at projects. We're very, very good at executing projects, school projects, although John may disagree sometimes, parks, complete streets. There's stuff that we do so very well. But the day-to-day maintenance of our infrastructure, we're getting a little long in the tooth. And I'm hearing a lot about this from constituents. And so the conversation that I had with Chaz was, he said, well, that really is a budget policy issue. If you want to start shifting some money from longer term capital into maintenance, that really is a select board policy, and I would need that direction. So that's why I bring this up. This isn't about, is someone doing a good job maintaining meters, or, are they filling the potholes? The question is, do they have the money and the resources to be able to do that? That's the conversation. I don't want to have that conversation with the DPW. I want to have that as a board.
Okay.
Got it. Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think it's a couple of things. One, to Mike's point, just not to put too fine a point on it, but really what you're talking about is around 5.6% of the total budget, because of that
The
40%,
discretionary part, yeah.
an overwhelming majority of it goes to things that we really have limited control over: salaries, pension, et cetera, healthcare, et cetera. So we are, but in the same way that, that's often what the lion's share of the scraping, even at the federal government, is over non-defense discretionary spending, which is tiny when you compare to everything else the government pays for. So it is important to know that the amount of discretion that we are able to impart onto the departments is always more limited than what we think, and that there are always going to be competing priorities with scarce resources. And unfortunately, as much as I like to try and say it's a zero-sum game, that the budget is ultimately a zero-sum game. There is ultimately, there's not money for everything that everyone under the sun wants to do. And that is where your broad priorities are so helpful to me in explaining that to staff. And I think what we've seen and what I've been trying to do in the year I've been here is really to, to take from the board what I have heard and translate that accordingly. I think that was really the process with the override, which was, the one, and, you may remember the prior process we went through in December of 22, where we sat in the, at the retreat, and I said, here's what I understand as priority one, here's what I understand as priority two. And the direction you gave me was put more money on the roads. And that's what we did. We put a lot more money on the roads, because that was the priority that you were hearing. And so my job is to be responsive to you when I hear that direction and to ensure that that reaches the department heads so that the discretionary spending we have is prioritized appropriately. And the way that things that can help me do that are long-term strategic planning that allows us for that opportunity to have the 5-year horizon so that, departments don't necessarily feel like the rug might be pulled out from under them on a year-to-year basis, but that there's a clear strategic framework for the vision that they can then move out with from there. But I also think it's important for to think through this revised process, which I think is going to be helpful, and I think we should try out. Just being clear on that front, like knowing that there are limited options available to you. What are the broad policy directions? For example, what Paul just outlined about maintenance versus new things versus restoring old things. Where do you want to see that focus, and how should we prioritize that appropriately? So I do want to bring the discussion back, though, because we are unfortunately midstream currently with the FY25 budget. And so one of the things that I think would be helpful for me to hear and to kind of close out this discussion is we put in the packet my memo, the memo that I drafted for you from FY24, asking about certain, what you want department heads to present to you. And I do just want to remind, both you and the broader public, of kind of the process that's going to be going through here. Department heads have two sort of major presentations to get through during budget season in order to ensure that the budget is ready to go. One is in front of you, and that is really a priorities-based discussion. That is one about, here's what we did last year, here's what we're doing this year, here's why we're doing it, here's what we heard from you. What comments do you have from us? What have you hearing? What are you hearing in the community? What is that feedback that you're giving us? The advisory committee is where the folks come out with the fine-tooth combs and the magnifying glasses, because they take their responsibilities very seriously. They are the people who present the budget. And so those are the people who will look at the roll-up codes and the individual line items and say, hey, you turned back X last year, you turned back Y this year. What are the dollars and cents here? Where are your FTEs? How are you, what are you doing with position control? That's where the rubber meets the road in terms of the dollars and cents. I think it's helpful for them to hear from you those broader policy rationales so that when they go to the advisory committee and have that really in-depth hashing out of their budget, they can say, I am following the direction of the select board, which indicates that these are the priorities that we need to focus on, and that's why the budget is the way it is. So with those kind of guiding principles in mind, it's helpful for me to hear from you what you would like the staff to be directed to bring to the budget meetings that they have with you over the next couple months.
Mike?
You raise a very interesting point about the advisory committee, which, having been on the advisory committee for a dozen years, I recognize that you're absolutely right. And my question is, should we be in some more formal way in telling the advisory committee what those priorities are?
I think this is one of those areas where when I first came here, I met with members of the advisory committee about something very similar to what is now being discussed, which is what is the role of the select board and the advisory committee really at the dawn of the budget process? And I do think that that's the opportunity there. We should be thinking about a Labor Day target for a conversation between the advisory committee and the select board.
Good.
About those priorities so that the advisory committee is already thinking as they start their season about what your priorities are and how they can help you shape the budget to meet them, right? The goal of the advisory, I view the role of the advisory committee as, the executive sets the priorities. The legislature reviews those priorities, gut checks it because they are, elected from more granular constituencies. But the ultimate role of the advisory committee as a fiscal advisory body is to utilize their expertise to determine how to meet the goals of the community how to translate the dollars and cents into reaching your policy goals. So to the extent that they have clear guidance from you, they can do their job better.
John.
So I just want to make a couple of points. We've been talking about the example of last year, and we said we wanted to spend more on streets, and we spent more on streets. A very important footnote to that is we had all this ARPA money available to us, which we're not going to have in the not too distant future. And we then had override money available to us, which who can say how soon we're going to have that money, that type of money available to us again. And without the ARPA money and the override money, it wouldn't have mattered that we think there should be a lot more done about the streets. We might not have had the money without taking it from somewhere else. And then you get to the hard part, which is where do you take it from if that's the only way you're going to get it? So I think that's probably one of the most difficult parts of the select board's role in this is when you only have, when it's a zero-sum situation and you have a priority that's not being met as a select board, you have a priority that's not being met, and you want to tell the department, I want $5 million more spent on streets this year, you better be able to tell them where it's going to come from. And those are the decisions that we are always reluctant to make and that are, much harder to make. That's point number one. Point number two, I have a fundamental problem with how we have done the budget reviews in the past, and I have just put it into the form of the memo, which most of you probably didn't have a chance to read. It's a very short memo. It's just a couple of paragraphs. The gist of it is, it's very unsatisfying to sort of finally have a chance to sit down, during a portion of a select board meeting with one of the department heads, especially those that we rarely, if ever, see, and to be told this is for us to have our chance to talk to the department head about the budget. And then the department head goes on for 20 minutes with a PowerPoint presentation, basically repeating stuff that we could have known going into the meeting. And then, oops, we don't have much time for questions. Anybody got any questions? And basically, we don't really get any satisfactory discussion going with the department head. So my suggestion, which I put into this memo, is could we please reduce what we want the department head to bring to us in terms of basic core information about their budget, have that in writing at least 2 days ahead of the select board meeting, and then use the entire time that is set aside for the department discussion of the department's budget, for an open-ended discussion between the select board members and the department head. Because, sometimes if you just open up the matter for discussion, you learn things that you didn't even imagine, that you weren't prepared to ask about. Because sometimes department heads have things they can bring to you, like we haven't actually been able to fill a lot of these positions, and that's important. Or our equipment is breaking down faster than we expected, and that's a capital budget question. And so we got to talk about how we're going to replace some of the equipment that I hadn't been planning on replacing, but now I got to replace it. So anyway, I'd love to have open-ended discussions and not sort of rote presentations.
And that's an inevitable consequence of trying to give direction
Yeah.
to a conversation. And we've learned that, I think.
Yeah.
We should fix it this year. Paul?
So I agree with John's comments. More interaction and the opportunity to have a conversation and dig in would be helpful. My experience on advisory with Mike, when Mike was on it, I don't think John, you and I never served on this advisory.
Not together, no.
But, I always struggled with advisory in the budget reviews because we were always in the weeds. We were looking at a part and we never had a holistic view of the budget, for the budget to say, here's the money, here's how much is absolutely required just to keep up with our legal contract requirements. And here's that whatever Jazz says is discretionary, and how we're prioritizing the discretionary money and how that fits into an overall prioritization for the town. And it's very difficult to sit through a departmental budget and believe that you're going to have some impact on, as John said, the expertise of the fire department. What am I going to say to the fire department? I don't know what I'm going to say. So, but I do think and I don't know how it is going to happen on the select board this year, but it would be helpful if Chaz could give us an overview of the budget. Broad, I know Melissa just did that, but even a higher level. Like we sat through a lot of PowerPoint slides in December. I feel like there's an overall view of the budget before we get into the specific weeds of departments. That would it would be helpful for context, because it's going to be difficult to ask one department to make a trade-off for some other department. It's, they may not be able to answer that. Anyway, my thoughts.
Mike.
Yeah, so you just raised a thought. First of all, I think Melissa does a fantastic job with putting together a combination of overview and detail.
My comment was not picking Chaz.
No.
It wasn't a commentary on
I
Melissa,
appreciate
sorry.
that. I appreciate that. But I wonder whether we're, rather than approaching the budget from speaking to the point that Chaz made about we're really dealing with 6% discretionary, the discretionary amount of the budget. I wonder whether it would be more sensible for us to ask for a discussion that focuses on that 6% rather than looking at the stuff that's already baked in, because there is a heck of a lot that's baked in.
Cheers.
So I think a couple of things here. One, that is generally what the departments bring to you, right? In their presentations to you is about that discretionary work, because they know, right, that salaries are what they are, OPEB is what they are. All of those things, and the regular wear and tear upkeep, there are policies and procedures in place. For example, we're going to spend more money on striping highways this year. We need to add money to that. We have a policy about how our costs escalate for landscaping. So we're following, and that dates back to the 2008 override. So we're following that. All of those things are kind of baked in, and we have that. I think it's really important for us on staff to direct you and give you in easily digestible form what comes in that giant thudding budget book that lands on your desk in February, because a lot of that is the sort of information you're looking for here. It's just presented in a way that I think can feel very forbidding when it is presented in that giant tome format, which is why OpenGov has been such a positive development for us. I think it can still feel like you're kind of delving into the archive, the vaults, to try and put some information forward. But I do think it's really helpful to have that information, which gives you that kind of more granular detail about the departmental goals and policies and so forth in advance, so that you can have that discussion with the department heads and feel well informed about what they want to be doing in the coming year and how they're spending their money towards it. So, our direction to, the department heads in preparing the budget book this year has been towards, making very clear in the documentation, what it is you're spending on, what we have control over, and all of those things. And so that to the extent that we can then digest and make that, part of the agenda packets well in advance, so that you have that information, it's ready to go, who's going when, you can read that, well in advance and be informed of it. We can have that ready for you. I was told that in the past, before this process kind of got formalized, and, because I think that the other aspect of this that's important to note is that there is a public audience for this work too, that I think is important to keep in mind, which is, it's tough, given the limited amount of time you all have, to present something that is both informative to you and informative to the department heads in terms of the feedback you give them, and informative to the public in terms of what's going on. I think if you have just the freewheeling discussion, that's good in a lot of ways, but it's also, you may wind up lost in the weeds, and you may wind up not providing the public with the overview that the department really wants to provide, which is, what are we doing for you? It's, for example, I think one of the reasons why IT really takes pride in the presentations they give to you is because they are not a division that faces the public very often, except in situations where someone, confronts a public facing. website or with some technology that is public facing. But the amount of work that they do and the amount of effort that goes into like the work that Funds Department does on a day-in-day basis is massive. And I think departments really value the opportunity to present not just to you, but to the public, how hard they're working for them. So it is, I think, worthwhile to have some presentation that doesn't presuppose information, but I see what your point, and we can adjust that accordingly so
Mhm.
that it is not solely that.
Jez, could we do, I'm sorry, Mike, did you have?
No, no, no.
Could we,
Okay, let's
Just-
try to wrap this.
yeah, I'm just wondering, so you raise a good point, though. There's a public consumption, right, of the budget, which maybe a longer presentation, deeper. And then there's a budget discussion, which is more appropriate for the select board. Can we divide these things up and maybe do a League of Women Voters budget presentation by staff that's all for public consumption, and then it's a little bit separate
Yeah, what
than
about
the
our
type of discussion we have?
budget,
So I do budget 101.
Yeah, budget
here,
101.
which I think is a little more high level than that, but I
Yep.
can delve a little deeper into that process and talk about what the individual departments do. And I do think then that we can prioritize appropriately, right? Last year, I think we said 7 slides, 10 minutes, and this year, we can enforce that. It's very
We didn't enforce it.
Right, but we can enforce that. And the other thing we can do is ensure that you are clearly pointed to and have at your fingertips the information available in depth about the budget well in advance of the meeting, so that you can have informed discussions with the department heads about the spending. I think that's probably the happy medium there, because it allows still for that, the presentational aspect in this forum, but then also allows you the leeway to ask detailed questions and sort of dig deeper, so that you're satisfied that your policy priorities are reflected in the budgets that are being presented to you.
And this year we have more time to spend on each, budget presentation, because we're not doing, common vic hearings
Right.
and, other license things. So,
Which is really freed up.
and look what time it is.
Yeah.
We're almost-
Yeah, we've had 2 good robust discussions here.
Yeah.
Except for Paul's time.
Yeah.
I was gonna
Okay.
say,
The things that we really should be discussing.
Yeah.
I'm happy to,
But I bet the license hearings go a lot faster when it's just,
yeah, we're very efficient.
yeah,
That-
I
that
bet- I
staff
bet they are,
doing it
yeah.
is
So,
attention.
let's try to wrap this up unless
Yeah.
people really need to,
no.
further
So
discussion.
I have
But-
some feedback from you, and I think
Mm.
what perhaps what we do in the next meeting, when we come back next week, if it's okay with you, is that I'll bring you a revised version of the memo to the
Okay.
departments for this year. You can just, you can offer your comments in red line, they can become part of the agenda, and then we will aim to finalize at next week's meeting, the memo to staff.
Okay, so, yeah, Mike?
Right, one thing I should mention is I will not be here or even available via Zoom next. I'm going to be 6 hours later in Rome. So midnight is not a good time for a Zoom call, I don't think. Pardon me?
Plus you're on vacation.
Well, yeah, well, that's beside the point. But if it was, because I don't mind taking it if I'm in the right time zone. But I promise that I will give you, Bernard, I'll give you comments back by Sunday and give them to Devin so that she can get them in
Okay,
early.
good. So that's the memo to department heads. I'd like to, unless anyone objects, I'd like to incorporate this idea of a goals and priorities document into our budget schedule. I mean,
Yeah.
I found a
Mm,
document, I forgot where it came from, but it lays out the budget schedule. And that's very, very helpful in terms of knowing what's coming up when and what we have to get ready for when. So what I would like to suggest is that we produce a budget schedule that incorporates, these proposals that I made. That's a document on paper that we can put in the packet.
Yep.
So that people are aware of, the process and what's coming up and what we have to get
I
ready
think
for.
it's a good
But
idea.
a significant part of the schedule will have already passed by.
Oh, yeah, so
there's-
we're really looking for,
We're looking at FY
next
26.
year.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right,
yeah,
right.
Please do include the workshop. Okay, if we need
Yeah.
3, then.
yeah, no, yeah.
3 is fine.
Jess, what is it, and as the newbie, this is a newbie question. When when will we have a better understanding of the town school partner and the split and the gap that may exist? I know there's a gap, there may be a gap on the school side, and maybe one on the town side, but that's really important for us to know kind of heading into this, right? What's reality and what's,
The governor's budget is due tomorrow. We are statutorily obligated 14 days from the governor's budget to present the document to you with the initial financial plan. So that's when so 2 weeks from tomorrow is the target for when we'll have the final answer to that. The answer right now, unfortunately, is, especially on the town side, it is a moving target. It is a moving target on our end as we adjust, as we make adjustments, as numbers come in from the state, and we're waiting for the so-called cherry sheets, which are going to have the final numbers in them, and we'll get those tomorrow. Once we have all that and plug that in, I will say, I can tell you now, and it's no secret, I am expecting the town to post a deficit. I think the realities of inflation and the increased cost from collective bargaining agreements has resulted in a deficit, and we're going to have to plug that deficit in some way. And what I intend to come to you with is options
Right.
for how to lower that, how to.
but you also have a sense of the school side, right?
Yes.
Of the equation.
Yes.
They're looking for maybe 8 million over last year. 7.945 was the last one
Right.
I saw.
Which is why I raised the issue of, as I'm not the first one to do it by any means, but picking up on the issue of enrollment and class size has to be discussed in a very frank way.
Yeah, I mean,
With the
well, I'm
schools.
happy to have that with you because I have kids in the school system and I'm pretty passionate about that. But there's other spending within the school budget.
I think
as
that's
well.
where the town school partnership is set to meet the first week of February.
Okay.
And that's where that discussion is going to be had, because
Okay.
yes, the schools are also projecting a deficit. We are projecting a deficit for the schools, and we need to, I'm sorry, and of course, I'm now, I'm sorry. So I was taught, it's, the question is whichever is later. So it's 14 days or whichever is later. So this year, the answer is actually February 15th, because that's the statutory deadline. It's either that or 14 days from the date the governor posts the budget, whichever is later.
Yep.
But we're still, I think, we will be in line to give more concrete information to the board in, 2 and change weeks. And then the official posting of the budget book will come on the 15th, which involves, the printing and all the details and so
Yep.
forth.
Okay.
But what I will tell you now is there are deficits projected on both sides. And the conversation with the town school partnership in early February will be a preview of those deficits and a question of how to close them.
Okay, good. Okay, I think Chaz and Devin and Kate, if she's listening, have their marching orders with respect to these two items. Let's move on to boards and commission appointments. Commission on Disability, do I have? Let me look at my notes here.
I can give you an overview if you don't have it readily available.
It's Lynn Mixek?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Everyone remembers her, right?
Oh, yes,
Yes,
definitely.
yeah.
Yes,
I
yes,
mean,
yes, yes.
So unless there's any discussion, I'd like to move approval of Lynn Mixek to the Commission on Disability. All in favor, please indicate by saying aye. John Van Scoyac,
Aye.
Mary Mashkenazi,
Aye.
Michael Sandman,
Aye.
Paul Warren,
Aye.
and chair votes aye. Next, we have two openings on the Economic Development Advisory Board, and the one before us is Mark Baer. Let's see, I'm trying to remember him. Yep, we remember him.
2 weeks ago,
Yeah, 2 weeks
2
ago.
meetings ago, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Any discussion? Seeing none,
He's recommended and supported by,
Sandy
Yes.
Silk.
right.
Yeah.
Yes.
I move approval of Mark Bayer to the Economic Development Advisory Board. All in favor, please indicate by saying aye. John Van Scoyac,
Aye.
Miriam Ashkenazi,
Aye.
Michael Sandman,
Aye.
Paul Warren.
Aye.
Chair votes aye. That concludes our meeting at 8:05.
Mhm.